Our discussants and panelists must also have their headphones on. Good morning, distinguished dignitaries, fellow colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. I am Hongjin Kim, researcher at the Jeju Research Institute. In today's session, JRI studies Korea's leadership in carbon neutral policy and explores the role of subnational actors by inviting experts from the central and regional governments, international organizations, and civil society. To begin, we have 3 speakers to deliver their congratulatory remarks. First, please give a round of applause to Chairperson Ja Nam-soo of the Jeju Special Self-Governing Provincial Council.
He is the chairperson of the Jeju Provincial Council.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 대한민국 제주 특별자치도의회 의장 좌남수입니다.
Good morning, everyone. I am Cha Nam-soo, Chairman of Jeju Special Self-Governing Provincial Council.
2008년 세계 최초로 기후변화법을 통과시키며 지구촌 기후 문제의 해결에 앞장서고 있는 영국에서 제26차 유엔 기후변화 협약 당사국 총회 한국 홍보관이 열리게 되어 대단히 뜻깊게 생각합니다.
It is very meaningful to be here today at the Korea Pavilion at COP26 here in the UK, a leading country leading climate action and the first country in the world to pass the Climate Change Act in 2008.
제주의 탄소 중립 정책을 국제사회에 홍보할 수 있도록 자리를 마련해 주신 구만섭 도지사 권한대행님과 김상협 제주연구원장님을 비롯한 관계자 여러분께 진심으로 감사의 말씀을 드립니다.
I would like to first thank President Kim Sang-hyup of Jeju Research Institute and for organizing this opportunity to share Jeju's carbon-free policy to the world, and Acting Governor Kuman-seop of Jeju Province and all distinguished guests today.
토론에 참여해 주시는 각국의 탄소 중립 리더 여러분께도 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다.
My sincere gratitude also goes to all speakers who will share their valuable insights at today's seminar.
COP26은 지구 평균 상승 기온을 1.5도 이내로 유지하기 위한 마지막 희망이라고 합니다.
COP26 is our last hope for keeping to the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
2030년 지구가 녹색 도시 그레스고에서 결정됩니다. 제주도가 2030년으로 향하는 희망의 동력이 되길 바랍니다.
What our planet would look like in 10 years' time will be decided here in the green city of Glasgow. Jeju will serve as an engine for our partnership and our efforts towards 2030.
제주도가 지난 10년 동안 선제적으로 추진해온 탄소 중립이 경험과 성과는 대한민국의 새로운 이정표가 되었습니다.
Jeju's experience and achievement in carbon neutrality that we have accumulated over the past decade has provided a milestone for Korea.
제주의 정책은 피포지 무수 사례에 소개되었으며 제주가 추진하는 정책들이 영국에 세워진 한국 홍보관을 통해 국제사회로 전파되어 개발도상국에 큰 도움이 되길 기대합니다.
Jeju's policies have been shared to the international community, and we hope that the policies shared today can reach the international community and assist developing countries in their energy transition.
무엇보다 기후 위기에서 지구를 지키는 연대와 행동이 가장 중요합니다.
To save the Earth from the climate crisis, cooperation and action are imperative.
오늘 토론을 통하여 지구촌의 연대와 협력이 강화되고 탄소 중립 사회로 가는 해법들이 논의되기를 간절히 기대합니다.
I hope today's discussion leads to stronger cooperation and partnership among global cities and look forward to hearing the solutions to accelerate the way to a carbon neutral society.
함께해 주신 모든 분들께 감사드리며 제주의 청정한 바람이 이곳 영국에 전해지기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you all for joining today, and may the winds in Jeju reach your turbines in Glasgow and back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Next, join me in welcoming the Republic of Korea Climate Change Ambassador Hyo-eun Kim. Ambassador.
Good morning, everyone. Distinguished organizers, moderators, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I extend my deep appreciation to all participants today for coming to Glasgow COP26 in spite of the pandemic. I also congratulate Jeju Special Self-Governing Province for organizing this event based on its front-running climate actions and leadership. I remember vividly the vision of Jeju Island to achieve carbon-free islands was announced in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. This announcement was made earlier even than the birth of Paris Agreement, which represented a milestone for recognizing the importance of local climate action. Until the accord, such efforts were paid little attention by many governments and climate change practitioners. But the Paris Agreement recognized the importance of subnational governments, authorities at the local, city, and municipal level, specifically those in developing countries, as key drivers in strengthening local resilience to climate change and as contributors to the long-term global response to climate change to protect people, livelihood, and ecosystem. This sentiment was amplified in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC's special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which noted that cities and regions may also be powerhouse of ambitious mitigation and adaptation measures that are hard to legislate and implement at the national level. The reason I'm telling this story is to highlight how forward-looking Jeju Province was in climate ambition and action. Under the ambitious target, Jeju Province has taken multiple implementing measures, such as increase of renewable energy, including smart grid, building electric vehicle infrastructure, and energy-efficient buildings and houses. This is very well aligned with key 4 items that Prime Minister Boris Johnson emphasized at his opening speech of this COP meeting. He said, COP26 must be the COP about coals, cars, cash, and trees. Coals, cars, cash, and trees. These 4 words are the key priorities of this COP26. Jeju Province is an early mover and model community in clean energy, green cars, climate investment, and forest. Therefore, Jeju's vision is very well aligned with the vision of COP26. Korea is now one of the dozen countries in the world who codified net zero by 2050 target in legislation. The Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth mandates 243 local governments to develop low emission plan to meet the net zero by 2050 target. President Moon Jae-in also mentioned the role of local governments in Korea's efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 in his speech at the World Leaders Session. Complementary to central governments, local authorities have a clear understanding of the priority needs of their communities from a climate action standpoint, as well as the convening power to translate goals into action. Just as importantly, they typically have the mandate to undertake the small and medium-sized investments that are required to build climate resilience and adaptation responses at the local level. Today's event is a wonderful opportunity to share accelerated actions driven by some national leaders, which is vital both for emission mitigation and for supporting resilient communities. UK presidency also designates the day of November 11th for promoting cities and regions' climate actions. Governors and mayors must be united behind the urgency for action with one voice, one ambition. Once again, I congratulate this useful opportunity to share the best practices and lessons learned regarding climate action at local governments. I wish all of you receiving insight on the proactive role of Jeju province. So I wish all the success of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, Ambassador. Now, without further ado, let us kickstart this session by inviting today's moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you today's moderator, Professor Sang-hyuk Kim, President of the Jeju Research Institute.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and I really thank you indeed for the kind and insightful remark by Ambassador Kim, and thank you, Chairman Chua, for showing the bipartisan great leadership in making this possible. Well, today it is my great pleasure to moderate this important side event with the title of the Carbon Neutrality Korea and Carbon-Free Jeju. Well, about 10 years ago, as Ambassador Kim said, when Jeju declared Jeju is going to be carbon-free by 2030, many people left the idea. And some of them even ridiculed the idea. But now, as you would see, Jeju is number one in terms of renewable energy penetration, and number one in terms of electric vehicle, and number one in introducing clean technology and clean system. But there's a long and windy way to go to reach the point of carbon neutrality. Having said that, we are going to hear first from the Director General of Jeju about the achievement of Jeju's and the challenges and future directions of Jeju. And after having heard about Jeju's briefing, and we will have a wonderful session for discussion. Let me introduce our wonderful panels today. From my immediate left, Professor Robert Stebbins of John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. He is also director of the Harvard Environmental Economic Programs, and he is simply the top scholar in this field. I really thank you for having your time with us. Please. And I'm proud to introduce to you Mr. Kim Joo-jin, who is representing Climate Solution. It's a very professional NGO in Korea. The top mission is to kick away coal-related activities in and outside Korea. Mr. Kim Joo-jin. And it is great delight to see you again, Mr. Ian de Cruz. Ian de Cruz is the global director of P4G Secretariat. P4G stands for Partnership for Global Green Growth and Global Goals. It's all about partnership, private, public, partnering. And yes, partnering. That is right. So thank you for coming, Mr. Ian de Cruz. So he is in that sense pioneering this kind of partnering project around the world. So let me hear first from the Director General, Mr. Yoon Hyung-suk, about the Jeju carbon-free islands challenge, achievements, challenges, and future directions. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hyung-suk Yoon, Director General of the Future Strategy Bureau of Jeju Local Government. Now, shall we explore CFI 2030 Energy Transition Policy. Over the past 10 years, Jeju had been transforming climate crisis to new green growth opportunity. At Paris, we present our own Green Big Bang vision, the carbon-free island 2030. This Big Bang triggers the seismic disruption in green energy and green mobility through using cutting-edge technology. CFI 2030 links initiative in energy, transport, power system, and big data. Jeju's CFI 2030 vision is the vision for our future generation. First, our island will run on 100% renewables by 2030. Second, a fully eco-friendly mobility system will form the backbone of our fleet. The first spark was building the smart grid demo project in 2009. In 2011, we transformed the island of Kapado, Jeju's first carbon-neutral island, running on only renewables for 7 consecutive days without burning a single drop of diesel. In 2020, 19% of our power demand was supplied by solar and wind power, which is 95% of the Korean government target for renewable in 2030. We are pretty fast. Our 24,000 electronic vehicles compose 6% of the total, the highest in Korea. We only expect this number is increased from 2030. Jeju will ban the registration of gasoline and diesel engines. Our researchers and scientists are exploring economic ways to reuse EV batteries as energy storage once they can no longer function for electronic vehicles. Despite our early start and success, we are facing new challenges. During the spark in renewables, we must stop wind operations to protect the grid. Expanded renewables inevitably create the problem of curtailment. In 2020 alone, we lost almost 20 gigawatt hours of clean power. So, increasing renewables while decreasing curtailment is a dilemma Jeju is determined to solve. Our experiment with the Jeju P2G, converting excess wind and solar into green hydrogen, stores Jeju's clean energy in fuel cell and power hydrogen vehicles and drones. Our pilot distributed energy system test, approved by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, is the first in Korea to maximize efficiency by remotely combining and controlling geographically distant solar panel and wind turbines. Jeju gathers all data and utilizing generation, storage consumption, which enables the exchange of renewables and margin cost. This snapshot shows the real-time power supply and demand for every 10 minutes. The implication behind this graph is simple. The blue line is total demand of Jeju electronic power. The green line is renewable energy lines. The yellow line is solar power. Red line is wind turbine, wind power. At each list, 60% of Jeju's entire demand is generated from renewables. Imagine what it will be if the pie goes full blue, like the flag Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Please join the beating heart of Jeju as we exploring smart and clean models for our sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, this is a very long story, but he had to make it short. So please, if you have any further questions regarding the contents, we can have interactive time after this session. Well, Jeju yesterday attended with the acting governor Gu Man-seop a very important meeting that is called Global Climate Coalition that was instigated by the Governor J.A. Robert Inslee. And 65 cities gathered together yesterday, and that size of the gathering is much bigger than the European economy as a whole. And if they are dedicated to combating climate change and determined to reach carbon neutrality, it will play a great contribution to the global target. That's what we need to show. So, Professor Stebbins, how would you interpret, how would you say about this kind of coalition and cooperation among cities? Mainly the composite parties are composed of nation states. Nation states are main actors, but I do think the cooperation between city level or sub-national level cooperation is quite important. Even the J. Inslee emphasized it is super-national cooperation. What would be the meaning in pursuing this kind of endeavor?
Well, thank you, Professor Kim. And let me first, before I turn immediately to your question, let me just say how pleased I am to join this session, as I have for many years enjoyed all of my interactions with the Korean delegation and the Korean Pavilion, previous COPs, as well as many visits to Seoul and, for that matter, to Jeju Island. So the reality is that the connection between the Paris Climate Agreement and the role of subnational jurisdictions is very strong.
Yes.
And I say this because although we don't yet know what the outcomes will be of COP26, we don't know in terms of finance, loss and damage, Article 6, the other pending issues. What we can say is that the Paris Agreement represents, in my view, a tremendous improvement over the Kyoto Protocol. And that's validated by the broad participation of 97% of global emissions being associated with participating countries. But the very feature of the Paris Agreement that has led to such high participation, namely that the nationally determined contributions are not dictated from above, as they were in Kyoto, but rather are from the bottom up. Each nation comes up with its own NDC in a way that it is presumably consistent with domestic politics and national circumstances. And that means that because of the global commons nature of the problem, that we would anticipate that although there's broad scope of participation, the individual NDCs will be less ambitious than they could be were it not a global commons problem.
Yes.
So the NDCs then rely upon the Paris Agreement's ratchet mechanism to increase their strength over time.
No sliding back.
But the ratchet mechanism simply provides for no sliding back,
Yes.
but it doesn't guarantee that there are going to be improvements over time. So the question then is, what can facilitate that? What can facilitate increased ambition of the key NDCs over time, of the 20 to 25 largest emitters in the world? And one answer to that, and a very important answer that is being examined in COP26, is the reality that national governments and subnational governments can form linkages internationally across borders so that one party can facilitate through finance or other means emissions reductions by other parties because it might be less expensive. So that brings down overall cost, and lowering cost facilitates, of course, greater ambition. Once those linkages are in place, then a company in Seoul can, in principle, get involved in an exchange with a company in Beijing, San Francisco, or Glasgow, anywhere else, under the linkage that's been established. However, when that trading takes place across jurisdictions, it's then important that those are correctly accounted for in terms of each of those parties' movements towards achieving its NDC. In particular, we want to avoid double counting, where both parties take credit for it. That's where Article 6 of the Paris Agreement comes in particular, Article 6.2
6.2.
as an accounting mechanism. Nothing less than that, and in my view, nothing more than that. In fact, if we wind up putting too much into Article 6.2 rule book in terms of constraints and requirements, it will simply kill international carbon markets. So that's very important this week, and that means that there are very important roles for national and subnational policy. The very nature of the NDCs themselves in the Paris Agreement put the policy work and all the other work to the parties and to subnational jurisdictions. And Article 6 presents the possibility that there are roles for the parties and for subnational jurisdictions that can go beyond each party's achieving its own NDC, but carrying out essentially foreign direct investment in other parts of the world, which is obviously good economically and is also good for climate change because it lowers costs and therefore facilitates greater ambition. So, in conclusion, under the Paris Agreement, the hard work is left for national, regional, and subnational jurisdictions and for the private sector. So to design, to implement, and then ultimately to comply with meaningful policies.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I will have further questions regarding the possible outcomes of the COP26, but we will hear first from Mr. Ian de Cruz, the Global Director of the P4G. So this spring, Mr. Ian de Cruz, you organized a very important summit in Korea, and please tell us what it was about. And then today we are going to have a very important event, the P4G Award. So Mr. Ian de Cruz will tell us about what it is about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, to Jeju Province, to the Jeju Research Institute and the Republic of Korea. You've really helped lead through a very practical example in a real economy in the city, the kind of future we want. And at the P4G summit that Professor Kim talked about, you brought a lot of global leaders together to really vindicate that if we want to take this action on climate action, no one single actor can do it. We need partnerships, but importantly partnerships with market-based solutions that can really bring the private sector investment at the speed and scale we need. So you've heard this week, big announcements, $130 trillion of commitments, $100 billion of climate finance needed for developing countries. But it has to start somewhere, and it has to start with real solutions, and that's what P4G is looking to be, is that delivery mechanism. So as you see here in this slide, we have this ecosystem. P4G itself is a partnership of 12 countries with Denmark, Netherlands, and the Republic of Korea as key supporters, with our partner countries around the world from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. We've started since 2018. We have partner organizations like Global Green Growth Institute, International Finance Corporation, World Economic Forum, and so forth. But the key is, how do we find bottom-up, as Professor Robert Stavin said, those market-based solutions, but in real economy? How do we take the Jeju Island example in Republic of Korea potentially into some of our other partner countries, whether that's in Bangladesh, whether that's in Colombia, whether that's in Ethiopia as an example? And a couple of key factors. Can we reduce emissions, impact the number of people who can get access to things like mobility, energy, water, and also leverage the significant scaling of private sector investment? And is that something, not only do we do it at national level, but through subnational and city-to-city cooperation? That's the challenge, but that's the opportunity, and P4G is putting up its hand to be part of that with partners, and hopefully with people like Jeju Province as part of that. So when we look at this need, we have not only the climate and COVID crisis, but where's that stimulus going? And in P4G, we're a bit tough on what we see as the situation. A lot of development capital we don't see is necessarily catalyzing private sector finance. And that also within the development financial institutions, they're not crowding in at that very early stage of trying to find innovative, transformative solutions. And that's what we think is really required. How can we bring that innovation and transformation in technology and investment to developing countries as quickly as possible, but on their terms, based on their bottom-up plans in the national climate action plans and sustainable development goals? What you see here is how we work within countries. So for example, in Kenya, or what we'd like to do with Korea, and what we've done in places in Kenya, we have the finance ministry involved, we have the Kenyan Private Sector Alliance, and we have their civil society involved into the global ecosystem. and then ultimately into global coalitions like Race to Zero. So if you use Jeju as an example, you're looking to go 100% renewable energy. That's a global coalition, but you're looking to do that in a city. How can we take that city model, for example, into what we could do with other countries in P4G's network? That's the dream, that's the vision, and we want to see how we can make that a reality. In looking at that, Jeju has been recognized by us as a leader in its work. Today, later on today, Professor Kim alluded, we will have a state-of-the-art award winners celebrated, and Jeju is one of the key winners in the energy section for what you have done to date in bringing electric mobility, decentralized grids, a potential hydrogen, green hydrogen economy future in an integrated transport and energy system. What we want to see is how do we take that leading work that you're doing and apply that into a situation like Kenya, for example, or Colombia. How do you bring that, but make that an investable business model? Not just a technical solution, but a commercial solution where in the developing countries, they can be part of that solution, driving jobs and investment for them, but also for the broader economy. So as we look at that, some lessons learned, and this was the Korean president at the P4G summit, we've learned some lessons that we want to share to everyone here. The first thing is, as you look at the Jeju type model and look to apply it in other cities and countries, who are the entrepreneurs in those countries who can work with you and really partner on the ground to develop that knowledge exchange very quickly? How can Korean corporates, and you have many big corporates, bring that technology, but working with these developing emerging economies together in terms of how you can localize that experience, build jobs and industries in those countries with them is very important. And with that cutting edge innovation, bringing that in terms that ultimately become commercial and investable models, so that it's not just grant-based funding, because the key for us is you have to move these investable business models beyond grant funding if you really are going to scale this in a sustainable way. So hopefully that's given you a sense of P4G and how we can see Jeju as a leading state-of-the-art sector winner, but also as an example of what we would like to bring in the P4G network.
Thank you very much, Ian. For your information, the story of Jeju, the detailed story of Jeju will be published through the vehicle of the World Bank, Jeju Research Institute, and the Coalition for Our Common Future wrote the more specific details of the Jeju's carbon-free strategy. Ian, to your eyes, what makes Jeju's story kind of appealing or unique to the rest of the world?
One of the things we look for P4G partnerships in general in Jeju is trying to show that is integration. Mm-hmm. It's not just taking a slice like mobility or renewable energy, but is actually saying how do we create a vision that is integrated. So the integration of energy and transport is very important. And I think it provides access to mobility. So from a developing country perspective, how do you get access for people to jobs, but in ways where the decentralized energy systems could make it cost effective as well. That's the next level.
Yeah, as you rightly pointed out, Jeju tried to establish a new kind of ecosystem, making every important green element go together. For example, we try to have renewables and electric vehicles go together, and with the help of a smart grid system, that's the way we need to go further. But having said that, it is true that we have not yet reached the goal of our target. We need to go a long way, and there are some hurdles, not just technological hurdles, but also institutional regulation-related hurdles. Jujin, in that regard, I know you know something behind the scene. And
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Jujin, and it is a great honor to be invited here today. As Professor Kim, as President Kim just mentioned, and as Director Yoon mentioned in his early presentation, Jeju has a lot of renewable capacity, a lot of renewable generation, number one province in Korea, but is experiencing challenges, especially with curtailment. And I believe the challenges that Jeju is experiencing right now has a very global context, global climate policy context, and I would like to briefly explain that. I think this Jeju's challenge is very important, especially because last week many governments around the world, including the Republic of Korea, signed on a statement to go from coal to clean, which includes a commitment to transition away from coal power by the 2030s. And in order to do that, the challenge that Jeju currently is experiencing should be overcome. Jeju, I think, is a very, very important battleground between fossil fuel generation and renewables.
That is right.
Jeju is an isolated grid. It has an interconnection with the mainland Korea, but when they built the interconnection, they thought electricity would flow from the mainland to Korea, to the Jeju Island, but now the situation is different. Jeju does have so much renewables, but the interconnection was designed the other way around, practically making of not much of use. Jeju has about 600 megawatts of average load per day, average load per moment. At the same time, it has 800 megawatts of solar and wind, which means that theoretically Jeju can be 100% renewable at a certain moment if the conditions are right. At the same time, Jeju has 900 megawatts of gas and diesel power plants, all owned by Korea Electric Power Corporation, or national utility. Whereas the solar and wind power plants are less owned. The market share of KEPCO there is smaller. Why is curtailments happening? And the curtailments, how extensive they are chipping into the profit margins of the renewable companies down there by 3 to 4%, which means that this can make many of the projects down there unprofitable. It's becoming a very important business issue down there. And reliability is the reason why these curtailments are happening. Is there a technological solution to this? Yes. And does our national utility know about that? Of course, because I know about that too. Real-time markets, flexible power markets, battery systems are the answer to that. Then why aren't these technological solutions be introduced? First of all, who will lose money if the renewable power plants are curtailed less and fossil fuel generators are curtailed more? The answer is pretty obvious. I told you that the gas power plants and diesel power plants down there are owned 100% by Korea Electric Power Corporation. Korea Electric Power Corporation, our national-owned utility, will lose the money. Will lose money on opportunity. Then who decides the reliability standards applied to the grid, applied to who goes into the grid, who has access to the grid, including whether or not to introduce real-time markets or compensate battery-related services? There's a government company called the Korea Power Exchange. It's the national grid system operator, and it should be independent. The UK has an independent body like this. Many other countries in Europe and the US have independent system operators, and these operators should be neutral to technology and independent. However, what happens if our national utility KEPCO holds a majority in the member meeting of KPX and have substantial presence in the board meeting of our system operator KPX? Well, I guess what will happen is the KPX would be a lot less willing to introduce policies that may undermine KEPCO's business interests. And guess what? Korea's energy regulators are saying exactly the same thing as what KEPCO is saying in Jeju. They are saying that we need coal power plants. We need coal power plants in 2030. 22%, they have to constitute 22% of our power mix because of reliability. And who owns the coal power plants? Almost all are owned by our national utility. And they are saying that our grid standards are not reliable at the same time. We definitely have a big conflict of interest issue here. And I think these kind of show you, this graph kind of shows you the figures in figures. Renewable markets are not fairly treated in Asia. Jeju as well, in Korea as well. Gas plants, small hydro plants, and battery systems all provide similar services. They contribute to the balancing of the grid. They manage the frequency of the grid. And gas plants, as I mentioned, are mainly owned by KEPCO, receive really big capacity payments for 24 hours a day. Small hydro plants receive a bit less, but they also receive. But batteries, nothing. This is not bringing in technology that is existing. And is this treatment consistent with our constitutional principles? And I think having a network dominated by one company and then they also have something in the generation business has a lot of antitrust implications. So, I believe this has a global context, because this is not just happening in Jeju, this is not just happening in Korea, this is happening all over Asia. And Asia, if you look at the announcement that's taking place around COP and the NDCs, is relatively behind when it comes to climate policy, despite the size of emission. Korea, Japan, China, all have very similar situations. All, unfortunately, are not leaders in climate policies. The bundled, vertically integrated, monopolized Asian state-owned utilities are not just a domestic threat, they are a major global climate threat, I believe. And something has to be done for that. Politically, I think, whereas in the past we've been asking President Moon, why Prime Minister Kishida, please do more with your NDC. Please do 50%, 40% of your reductions in your NDC. Instead of saying that, President Moon, Prime Minister Kishida, you've done a great job. However, you can do more. If you look into your power system, if you start questioning the data that your energy regulators or your utility is providing, you can do more. I think that should be the global narrative, rather than saying that President Moon, you should do that, and ask him to ask his employees in the power sector, in the power regulators. So there should be a narrative change, especially with Asian state-owned utilities, I believe. And number two, we have a lot of precedents to learn from. The bundled power market, vertically integrated power market, should be, to some extent, unbundled. Mm-hmm. And Europe, Eastern European countries, former Soviet bloc companies, are good experiences there and have provided good experiences there. That kind of experience sharing is needed. And I think nobody from the antitrust authorities in Korea are here in the delegation. I think it would be good to have more of them in the next COPs. So those are my points for today. Thank you very much for inviting me, and the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you. He used to be a lawyer, and then, well, I strongly believe that every time we see the real case, devil is in details, and it's not just technological problems, but also institutional matters that are blocking progress. And in that regard, the monopoly issue of KEPCO, and especially in the wholesale market, should be addressed during the presidential election campaign. That's a huge issue, and we need a strong national leadership to address that. And then that is not just isolated case in Korea. Many countries in the world have similar problems. So that's a very good point. And for that, Jeju is going to have a special treatment in the name of Jeju is going to be designated as a special district for decentralized energy system, hopefully next year. Then many things that were impossible before would happen. We would have many new things under the new deregulation policy. If you have any question regarding that, I think Director Yoon would answer to you after this session. And let me go back to you, Professor Stubbins. For your information, he really kindly accepted our proposal to be a special advisor to the Jeju local government to pursue a carbon-free objective. So what was your thinking at the time? How do you see the results so far? So what would you like to see maybe in 10 years' time? from now on, and you emphasize the importance of the subnational level efforts. So well, again, I thank you indeed for your great contribution to Jeju.
Thank you for Professor Kim. I think there are two important ways in which the experience on Jeju Island contributes. One is simply in terms of the actual performance itself, because Jeju Island is part of the country, and therefore it helps Korea to achieve its targets. The other way is as a demonstration. It's a demonstration both domestically for other parts of Korea. It's a demonstration internationally. It's a very significant demonstration for China, given the number of Chinese people who are coming to Jeju Island.
Yes.
And it can show other subnational jurisdictions exactly what they can do. So much of what we hear is just talk. Targets for the year 2050, which, it's very easy to state a target that's that far in the future.
Yes.
A target for 2030 requires more credibility. But even more than that is taking action immediately with policies, with technologies, with real implementation. And that's what's been happening on Jeju Island, and that's why other parts of the world, the mayor of New York City, the mayor of Paris, the local officials who have been making very impressive statements about their targets and objectives for the long term can look to Jeju Island to see what they can actually do tomorrow.
Okay, great. In that regard, I'm happy to let the audience know that the Jeju has a sistership relation with Hainan, the future city of China in terms of free economic zone, and they are go for green, and then we have a very cooperative relationship with Hainan in that endeavor. And besides that, we have had a high hope for this COP26, but so far, it is criticized to some sense. Rather than a real progress, there are more hot air. And with the over promise and with under delivery, COP needs to show more, and especially without the Chinese leadership here. What would you like to see? How would you see the difference this time of COP from among other COPs so far? What should be achieved through this big gathering? There are more than 400,000 people are here to attend this meeting, but we need a real result. What would you like to see?
Well, I think the first thing that we should acknowledge is that the reason that we got the Paris Agreement was because of the co-leadership of two countries,
China,
the United States and
that
China.
Is right. Obama at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And unfortunately, during the successor president, the former President Trump, there began a movement away from, in the United States, away from cooperation with China to confrontation with China.
Yes.
And sad to say, to some degree, that has been continued by the current U.S. Biden administration. That's gone from Trump's expression of America first to the new expression, which is American manufacturing first. But both of those are fundamentally economic populism. They're not supportive of international trade. And now what's happened is that rather than cooperation on climate change leading to cooperation between the United States and China on other issues, it's confrontation on other issues that's making more cooperation on climate change impossible. So it's international trade, it's human rights issues, intellectual property, national security in the South China Sea, democracy in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and independence. All of those issues now are bleeding over into climate change, so that the lack of action to some degree is, I think, an unintended consequence of that. And it's the Biden administration wants to come back to the table with China, at least that's my understanding. And the Chinese government, from its perspective, says, well, yes, but there have to be some linkages, there has to be some trade-offs with these other issues. And the U.S. administration has said, no, there can be no trade-offs. So there's something of an impasse, and therefore, although I think this COP is going to make progress in specific ways, it lacks this incredible leadership of the world's two largest emitters that we had with Paris.
But the kind of nature of this conflict or tension between the two big countries would not go away easily. About a year ago, we had a small informal dialogue with John Kerry, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former head of UN, and Mr. Xie Jinhua, the Chinese leading negotiator. They all agreed that this is a global commons and we are going to cooperate on climate issues. I thought we could have that, but it's gone due to the kind of geopolitical, economical kind of populism as you described. So maybe can we wait next year in Egypt to see that happen? And besides, there's a worry. What if we have another Trump?
Yeah.
He's gaining popularity again in the United States.
So Xie Jinhua and John Kerry have a close personal working relationship going back to the time before the Paris Agreement and then through the Paris Agreement.
That is correct.
But neither of them are heads of state. And in the United States, it's not only a matter of the question of the head of state. We have an independent Congress who is co-equal with the executive branch. And again, the reality is one of the few things on which this White House agrees with both Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. Congress is China bashing. That's the one thing on which they're actually on the same page. And I think that's very, very sad, and ultimately is not just problematic for international climate change policy, it's going to be problematic for much else. I'm an economist, so I'm also worrying about, international trade.
Yes, thank you. In this very regard, Mr. Ian de Cruz, the value of P4G shines ever more because it is about true partnership, not kind of political rivalry or competition. So what would be the future of P4G maybe in 10 years' time from now? How do you like to move the P4G into the heart of the world?
That's a big question, Professor Kim. And I suppose modestly...
But this is not about big countries' hegemonic gathering. It is about pure partnership, right?
So,
basically.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see in 10 years' time that P4G is part of a coalition of doers that is unlocking this 130 trillion, these 100 billion.
Real doers.
But yeah, bring those real doers together. So, you might have these politics that goes on and it's unhelpful, but at the end on the ground in places like Bogota, electric buses are happening, and they include Chinese technology and they include American technology, and there's combinations of Korean technology that we can all bring in, but based on markets. And I think in that way, what we'd really like to see is a huge part of the solution is this ratcheting mechanism is very important of what we're seeing in COP, but you're seeing a lot more private sector participation and investment. You're seeing in things like the science-based targets a huge corporate push there. But what P4G wants to do is start bottom up with what are the solutions that can truly be business models that can be invested at scale. And really we see developing countries as not only vulnerable, but actually the economic agents of change. So if we can really bring as quickly as possible that technology and investment on the terms of our countries and our partner countries like Bangladesh and Indonesia and Vietnam, like Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, that I think creates the opportunity for inclusive growth, sustainable development, but a bigger economic cake that can be shared multiple ways. But it's almost reversing the mindset that it's not that developing countries get third, fourth, fifth generation technology in a 5-10 years. It's really that they get first generation straight away at the same time.
Very good job. Very good. It's a real coalition of like-minded doers, right? And Jujin, as a leading civil society activities, and you are saying the fair competition and fair transaction should be the center of the solution approaches. What would you do to enhance Jeju's carbon-free strategy?
Well, I showed you a graph where
As an advisor, right.
where gas, small hydro, and batteries are not treated differently. I would first try to find the true cost of the service, true value of the service, auctioning and things like that. Market mechanism would usually do that, and pay less, which will eventually lead to paying less to gas power plants and paying more to batteries, and batteries will quite likely prevail in many ways, and that will reduce the gas power, and which is fossil fuels. So that's an easy thing. In a more longer perspective, this is happening basically because the company that controls access to the grid also has a lot of generation assets, and under that condition, and if those assets are mainly fossil fuel generators, of course it's very reasonable that they don't want to have renewables in their game. So that has to be changed in the US, in the EU, and many other countries. The way they did that is they didn't do necessarily privatizing the power sector. They divided the governance of the generation companies and the transmission and distribution companies. So that could be done.
Okay. And thank you. We have a new panel who is Anna Leasing, who is a senior climate advisor to the Washington Governor, Jay Inslee. Jay Inslee is a climate champion in the United States, next to the former Governor Brown these days. And he is so much dedicated to a global coalition to combat climate change issues. And I briefly told you about the initiative Governor Jay Inslee has taken. And we were really impressed by the leadership he has shown. And you are kindly invited Jeju to be a part of the coalition. So what would you like to share with the audience? What kind of things we can do together?
Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Anna Leasing with Governor Inslee's office, and we just wanted to thank Jeju for being such strong partners in this. What we have set out to do, and Governor Inslee's intention has been to really showcase the role and the strength that subnational, or as he likes to call it, supranational leaders have in ensuring that there is continued work on climate action and progress, especially in areas where nation states have some difficulty moving as aggressively as we need to meet the urgency of the climate crisis. So with this supranational effort, we have very strong climate actions that 68 governments have signed on to. Things like both Washington State and Jeju have both signed on to 100% new vehicle sales being zero emission beginning 2035, transitioning 100% of our public fleets to be, our light duty fleets to be 100% zero emission by 2035, and medium and heavy duty fleets by 2040. And then very meaningful progress around how our electricity is supplied. So 100% clean energy by 2045, and that means taking immediate actions in order to achieve those goals. One thing I did want to share with this group is that, it sounds like, having 68 governments work together, even though none of us are a nation state, has a very strong collective power. If the 68 governments that have signed on to this were a country, it would represent the third largest country in the world.
Yes.
These 68 governments represent 470 million people, and they also represent 20% of the world's GDP. And then the commitments they signed on to, the governments generate more than 3.7 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's roughly the total emissions that we see from the European region. So having these 68 governments commit to strong and near-term climate actions, we hope will have a very profound effect in making sure that we have tangible progress in mitigating the climate crisis.
Thank you. Well, just before you came in, Professor Stebbins and I talked about the things we are missing in this COP. That is global leadership. What we go back to the year 2015, there was two great leaders from the United States and China. And these days we don't have it. So that's where we are seeing the absence of China's leadership here. And that shows the importance of the city level cooperation without having kind of political struggle with each other. So what would be the future of the global climate coalition, maybe in the year 2040?
In 2040, hopefully we've already achieved our goals, but we are thinking much closer in terms of, we have set up structures with our partnering coalitions. So with Under2, the U.S. Climate Alliance, and with C40, we've actually asked them to set up structures to be able to facilitate sharing of resources, technical expertise, providing technical assistance to help governments implement and work together and learn from each other so that we can enable and help each other be successful in these endeavors. And we hope that with each COP, we can create a forum for this coalition to reconvene and report out on how we're doing to make sure that we're holding each other accountable and making progress in achieving these goals.
Okay, Stebbins, would you have some comment on this kind of initiatives?
Well,
kind of city level cooperation?
As I said, that the very structure of the Paris Agreement is one that implicitly allows for action by subnational jurisdictions, even though it's only parties to the agreement that can take on specific actions such as trading under Article 6, because of the fact that local jurisdictions are part of larger jurisdictions. It means that any actions they take on do two things. One is that they have the effect of lowering emissions within the larger jurisdiction, but more importantly is, as I said before, as demonstration. I mean, I have always thought that the real value of California's cap and trade system, which only accounts for about 15% of the state's emissions reductions, was much greater than that, because it's a demonstration to other parts of the world, to Quebec, previously to Ontario, for that matter to the European Union, where there was tremendous communication between the two, and for that matter to Seoul, for its cap and trade system. So that's where there is tremendous value, is demonstration.
Okay, now it is time for us to close this side event. We are going to invite the acting governor of Jeju special self-governing province, whose name is Mr. Gu Man-sup. He is going to give us a closing remark.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Gu Man-sup, acting governor of Jeju special self-governing province. I would like to first thank Professor Robert Stevens of Harvard University, Mr. Ian De Cruz, Global Director of P4G, and Bizan Leasing, a senior climate advisor to Governor of Washington,
Thank you for coming.
and Mr. Kim Joo-jin, managing director at Solutions for Our Climate, for sharing your insight on achieving carbon neutrality. Your valuable ideas will provide a milestone for opening a sustainable and harmonious future. As we embark on the implementation of the Paris Agreement this year, cooperation and partnership between and among nations and cities are imperative. This is our last chance to save the Earth. To tackle climate change, cities need to come forward and take action. We need to act together for our families and our children. For a stronger climate partnership among global cities, Jeju will actively share our knowledge and experience gained from CFI 2030. We ask for your continued support and look forward to the journey we'll take together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your valuable time with us. This is how we conclude this side event. Thank you for coming despite your busy time.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating. We will have a short photo session now that we have our senior climate advisor, Anna Lee, here.